There is a man, and I want you to picture him clearly, because you probably already know someone like him. He does not yell. He has never, in the entire time you've known him, raised his voice above a calm, measured tone. He does not slam doors. He does not throw things. He does not say cruel words in the heat of the moment the way most people do, the way you probably do sometimes, the way anyone who is fully human and fully feeling does occasionally. He is, by every visible measure, composed. People describe him as steady, as grounded. His colleagues say he handles pressure well. His family says he never loses his temper. He is the person others point to when they want an example of emotional control. And emotional control, we've been told our entire lives, is a virtue. Here is what you don't know yet. The woman sitting across from him at the dinner table has not laughed, genuinely laughed, not performed laughter, in 11 months. She doesn't know why. She cannot explain it clearly, even to herself. She only knows that something has been removed from her, slowly, the way water removes stone, not in one violent event, but in 10,000 gentle ones. She cannot point to a single moment he hurt her. That is the problem. That is precisely the problem. This video is about one thing. The most dangerous people in your life are not the loud ones. The loud ones are easy. You feel the hit. You identify the source. You leave. Or you don't leave. But either way, you know what you're dealing with. The quiet ones are different. The quiet ones sit across from you at dinner, composed, reasonable, patient. And they take something from you so gradually that you don't notice until you reach for it one day, and it isn't there anymore. By the time you finish this video, you will be able to name what they take. You will be able to name the 7-stage process they use to take it. And you will understand, with the kind of clarity that arrives almost before the pain, why the absence of noise was always the sign, not the reassurance. Stay with me. Let's start with something that seems obvious once you say it out loud, but has almost certainly never been said to you directly. We were taught from the beginning that anger looks like noise. Think about how we describe dangerous people: volatile, explosive, hot-tempered, a ticking time bomb. All of these are auditory and kinetic metaphors. They describe something that moves, something that erupts. And the opposite, someone still, someone quiet, someone who maintains composure, we describe with words like calm, stable, safe. This is one of the oldest and most consequential mistakes the human mind makes, and it is not a small error. It is baked into every system of social evaluation we have built. In the workplace, we promote the composed person. In relationships, we're drawn to the steady one. In families, the parent who never loses their temper is held up as the model. In friendships, the person who handles conflict without raising their voice is considered mature. What we have never built into our evaluation system is this question. Because here is the psychological reality, and this is not a fringe idea. This is documented across decades of research in personality psychology, attachment theory, and the clinical literature on covert control. Composure is not inherently a virtue. It is a tool. And like every tool, its moral weight depends entirely on what it is being used to do. A surgeon's steady hands are a gift. A surgeon's steady hands removing something from you that you didn't agree to remove, in a room you didn't know you were in, while explaining calmly that this is for your own good. That is something else entirely. Dr. Lundy Bancroft, who spent decades working with men who were identified as controlling partners, made an observation in his clinical work that I want you to sit with. He noted that the men who were most difficult to identify as controlling, the ones whose partners had the hardest time naming what was happening to them, were consistently not the ones who screamed. They were the ones who never did. Because the screaming partner gives you a reference point. You can say, "He screamed at me on Tuesday." You can point at it. You can describe it to a friend, and your friend will wince and say, "That sounds awful," and you will both agree on what it was. The quiet partner gives you no such reference point. He spoke to you calmly on Tuesday. He explained, reasonably, patiently, with a kind of precision that made you feel you should be taking notes, why your interpretation of the situation was incorrect, why your feelings, while understandable, were not entirely accurate. Why the way you remembered the conversation from last week was not quite the way it happened. Why, if you thought about it clearly, you'd see that he was not the one causing the problem. He did this without raising his voice. And when you tried to explain how you felt, when the words started coming out uneven, when your voice cracked a little, when your eyes filled without your permission, he waited. He let you finish. He nodded. And then he continued. He was never cruel. He was never loud. He was never anything you could point to. What he was doing has a name. It has several names, in fact, depending on which corner of the psychological literature you're standing in. But for this video, we are going to call it what it functionally is. We are going to call it the silence method. And we are going to walk through it, stage by stage, the way you'd walk through the rooms of a house before you understood that the house had been designed to keep you inside. I want to be precise here, because precision is the only tool that works against this particular thing. The silence method is not a single behavior. It is a sequence. It is a process that unfolds across time, sometimes weeks, sometimes years, and it has a structure. The structure is what makes it possible to recognize, and recognition, as we'll discuss later, is the only moment that matters. Here are the 7 stages. The first stage is not about control. It is about selection. People who operate this way are not indiscriminate. They are, in fact, unusually perceptive about people. Specifically, they are perceptive about which people will respond well to a particular kind of attention. What they are looking for in the early weeks of any relationship, romantic, professional, familial, is a specific combination of traits, not weakness, exactly. The word weakness is too simple and too cruel for what they're actually identifying. They are looking for people who are, and finally, people who have been conditioned to interpret the absence of anger as the presence of love. This last one is the most important, and we'll return to it. In stage 1, the person using the silence method is generous, attentive, and remarkably calm. They listen well. They don't react disproportionately. They seem, and I want you to hear this word the way it sounds in retrospect, safe. You tell your friends about them. Your friends are impressed. You are a little impressed yourself. You have been around loud people, volatile people, people whose moods were weather systems you had to navigate constantly. This person is different. This person is still. You don't yet understand that the stillness is not peace. It is patience. Stage 2 begins so gently that most people, in retrospect, cannot identify exactly when it started. That is not an accident. It begins with a small correction. Not a correction of something you did, a correction of something you perceived. You mentioned that a mutual friend seemed cold to you at dinner. They say, mildly and without heat. I don't think that's quite right. I thought she was actually pretty warm. You might have read it wrong. You describe a conversation with your mother that upset you. They say thoughtfully, I wonder if you're interpreting that through the lens of your history with her. It might not have been as deliberate as you felt it was. You express worry about something at work. They say, I think you're catastrophizing a little. The data doesn't really support that reading. Each of these moments is small. Each is delivered calmly. Each sounds on the surface like the kind of thing a caring, reasonable person would say to ground you when you are being reactive. But here is what is actually happening. Your internal experience, what you saw, what you felt, what you heard, is being gently, consistently repositioned as less reliable than their external interpretation of the same event. You begin, barely perceptibly, to check. Before you land on a feeling, you run it past them first, or past your imagined version of their response. You begin to do this not because you have been told to, but because the small corrections have accumulated into a question. Am I sure? Am I reading this right? Maybe I'm missing something. This is stage 2. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It will not, in retrospect, produce a single memory you can point to and say, there. That was the moment. It produces only a faint new habit, a habit of doubt. Here is where the process crosses a line that most people never consciously register crossing. Because of the accumulated small corrections of stage 2, you begin, unconsciously, incrementally, to edit yourself before they have to. You preemptively moderate. You preemptively explain. You begin, before you speak, to anticipate where they will find your perception wanting, and you adjust it in advance to something you think will hold up to their level evaluation. You stop saying, "I was hurt by that." You start saying, "I know this might be an overreaction, but..." You stop saying, "I don't want to do this." You start saying, "I understand why this makes sense, I just..." You stop expressing feelings as facts about your inner life and start expressing them as drafts, subject to revision, offered tentatively, hedged on all sides. The remarkable thing about stage 3, the thing that makes it so invisible, is that it feels, from the inside, like growth. You feel like you are becoming less reactive, more measured, more fair, because the alternative interpretation, that you are being systematically taught that your unedited experience of the world is not trustworthy, is one the mind resists enormously. The mind will accept a flattering misreading before it will accept a threatening, accurate one. You are not growing, you are shrinking, and you are doing it yourself, which is the most efficient possible version of the process. Stage 4 is the first stage that involves a clearly legible action, which makes it slightly easier to describe, but only slightly, because the action itself is designed to look like something else. At some point, and this will feel natural, even inevitable by this stage, they will present you with a conflict of loyalties, a situation in which supporting them requires you to distance yourself from someone else who matters to you. It will not be framed as a demand. It will be framed as an observation, a concern, a reasonable, measured piece of information shared with you by someone who has your best interests in mind. Let me give you a concrete example, a composite drawn from multiple accounts in the clinical literature, because the details matter here. The details are what make this recognizable. Her name in this account is Sarah. She has a best friend she has known since university, someone who knew her before this relationship, someone who has no reason to reinterpret her. They speak twice a week. They are not dramatic friends. They are the kind of friends who send each other articles and meet for coffee and know each other's family members' names. One evening, about 4 months in, Sarah mentions to her partner that she spent the afternoon with this friend and that she'd been venting about a difficult week. Her partner listens. He says nothing for a moment. Then he says gently, "I've noticed you seem different after you see her. More anxious, more in your head. I wonder if she's processing her own stuff through you." That is the sentence. That is stage 4. Note what it is not. It is not, "Stop seeing her." It is not, "I don't like her." It is not even a direct criticism of the friend. It is a clinical observation, delivered with what sounds like care, about the effect this relationship has on Sarah's well-being. Sarah does not stop seeing her friend that week. She doesn't stop the following week either. But something has been introduced into the relationship. A question. A small seed of re-examination. The next time she comes home from coffee, she monitors herself slightly. Is she anxious? Is she more in her head? She looks for the thing he described, and because she is looking for it, she sometimes finds it, or finds something she files under that label. Over the next 2 months, the observation is repeated. Not frequently, perhaps 3 times, in slightly different forms. Always calm, always framed as concern for her, never as criticism of the friend. I just want to make sure the people you spend time with are actually lifting you up. You always seem a bit flat after those coffees. I'm probably reading too much into it. By month 6, Sarah is seeing her friend once a month instead of twice a week. She tells herself it's because she's been busy. She tells her friend the same thing. The friend, who has known Sarah since they were 22, and who notices the change more clearly than Sarah does, accepts this. She does not want to add pressure. The circle has drawn in. No demand was made. No ultimatum was given. No argument occurred. A calm, repeated observation was enough. Because by stage 4, the observation of someone whose perception you have been trained to trust over your own is not a small thing. It is the weather. And the weather changed. This is what stage 4 looks like in practice. It will not always be a friend. Sometimes it is a family member, a mother who seems to infantilize you, a brother who doesn't really respect your boundaries. Sometimes it is a colleague or a mentor or a therapist. The specific person matters less than the pattern. Someone who knew you before. Someone whose independent perspective on your life is a potential threat to the controlled version of your reality, is gently repositioned as a liability. And here is the thing that makes stage 4 so difficult to name in the moment. They are sometimes right. Not always. Not even usually. But sometimes, the friend does process their anxiety through you. Sometimes the family member is complicated. The sliver of truth is the door. The sliver is always the door. What distinguishes stage 4 from a genuine, caring observation made by a healthy partner is not the content. It is the pattern. A healthy partner might say once, "I noticed you seemed tense after that conversation. Are you okay?" And then they would follow your lead. They would not return to it. They would not build a case across 6 months of gentle repetition until the relationship had quietly contracted. The test is not what they say. The test is what they do when you don't respond to it the way they hoped. Now we reach the stage that gives this method its name. By stage 5, you have been shaped. You are smaller than you were. Your confidence in your own perception has been, not destroyed, but significantly eroded. The circle of people around you has drawn in. You are, in ways you would struggle to articulate, more dependent on their reading of reality than you are on your own. And then they go quiet. Not angry quiet, not loudly silent, just absent, withdrawn, a degree colder, present in body, unavailable in everything else. No explanation is offered, because no explanation is needed. By stage 5, you have been trained, and I use the word deliberately, to treat their emotional temperature as weather you are responsible for. When it goes cold, you search yourself for what you did. You review your recent behavior. You run back the last conversations. You look for the moment you misstepped, the moment you were too much, the moment you failed to preemptively edit correctly. And then you begin the process of addressing it, apologizing for things you're not sure you did, softening positions you're not sure were wrong, bringing the temperature back up through whatever careful diplomacy is required. You will almost never be told what you did, because in many cases, you did nothing. The withdrawal is not a response. The withdrawal is a mechanism. It is pressure applied without violence, without noise, without a single actionable word that could be quoted back later. It is invisible leverage. And by stage 5, it works perfectly. If you've lived through stages 1 through 5, there will come a moment, often prompted by someone outside the relationship noticing something, or by a piece of clarity that arrives in the night when the defenses are down, when you will try to name what is happening. You will try to describe the pattern, the small corrections, the managed retreat, the loyalty tests, the silences. You will try to say, "I think something has been done to me." Stage 6 is what happens next. They listen, calmly. They let you finish. And then, with a patience that will briefly make you feel you are the luckiest person alive for having someone this emotionally mature in your life, they say something like, "I hear that you feel that way. I'm concerned about you. The fact that you're interpreting normal behavior as something being done to you, I think that's worth examining. I think you might be bringing some old patterns into this." They do not raise their voice. They do not dismiss you angrily. They receive your accusation and return it, gently, as evidence of your dysfunction, rather than theirs. And here is the worst part, the part that makes stage 6 the most insidious stage of the sequence. They are partly right. You do have old patterns. Everyone does. You do sometimes misread situations. Everyone does. The sliver of truth in what they've said is enough for the mind to grab onto, to begin doubting the larger claim, to wonder, not for the first time, and not for the last, whether you are the problem. That sliver is the point. That sliver is the door staying open just enough to keep you inside. And here we arrive at the stage that is hardest to talk about. Not because it is complicated, because it is simple. Stage 7 is the point at which you have been reshaped enough that even if every other condition changed, even if they left, even if you left, even if the whole structure dissolved overnight, you carry it with you. The habit of doubt has become a feature of your internal landscape. The reflex of preemptive editing has become your default mode of self-expression. The ability to trust your own perception, to feel something, to name it, to hold the name with any confidence, has been so carefully and consistently undermined that you do not know, anymore, how to do it cleanly. You go to a therapist and describe a relationship, and you do it the way you learned to do it in stage 2. Hedged, pre-revised, already corrected before you offer it. I know I might be reading this wrong, but you meet someone new who is kind to you, and your body does not know how to receive it without waiting for the correction. You wait for the moment they tell you your reading of the kindness is slightly off. You sit in a room, alone, and try to answer the question, "How are you?" The simplest question, and you cannot get there without first wondering what the correct answer is. That is stage 7. That is what the silence took. And here is the line I want you to hear. I want to spend some time here, because I think one of the reasons people who have been through the 7 stages struggle to heal is that they are often deeply ashamed of having gone through them. They feel they should have seen it. They feel they should have been smarter, stronger, less susceptible. They have absorbed, somewhere along the way, the idea that what happened to them reflects something deficient in them. I want to address this directly. What happens inside the brain of a person going through stages 1 through 7 is not a failure of intelligence or character. It is a predictable, documented neurological response to a specific kind of chronic stress. And understanding it changes the conversation. Here is the relevant science, as precisely as I can give it to you. The human brain has a threat detection system centered in a region called the amygdala that is exquisitely sensitive to unpredictability. Not to pain, specifically, to unpredictability. Research on what is called intermittent reinforcement shows that brains become more, not less, attached to sources of unpredictable reward and punishment than to consistent sources of either. This is counterintuitive, but extremely well documented. It is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The variable reward, the slot machine that pays out sometimes randomly, without pattern, produces stronger neurological attachment than a machine that always pays out or never pays out. A relationship with a person using the silence method is a textbook intermittent reinforcement environment. The warmth is real. The withdrawal is real. The warmth returns. The withdrawal returns. The brain, trying to find the pattern, trying to stabilize the unpredictability, dedicates enormous resources to decoding the other person. Over time, and this is the part that explains stage 3, the managed retreat, the brain begins to assign control of the emotional environment to the other person rather than to the self, because the other person is the most powerful variable in the environment. The brain is not being foolish. The brain is being adaptive. It is identifying the correct variable and orienting toward it. The problem is that this orientation, over time, becomes internal architecture. It becomes the default, the self, the person who began the relationship with their own perception of things, their own emotional readings, their own reference points, has been functionally relocated. Their center of emotional gravity has moved outside themselves. This is not weakness. This is what happens to a normally functioning human brain in an environment it was not designed to navigate. There is also a cortisol component worth naming. Chronic relational uncertainty, the kind produced by stages 4 through 6, maintains cortisol levels at a height that impairs the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for perspective taking, for holding contradictory information, for doing the kind of clear self-assessment that would allow a person to recognize what is happening to them. In other words, the very mechanism of the silence method, the sustained low-grade uncertainty, neurologically impairs the brain's ability to identify that the silence method is occurring. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The process disables the instrument you would use to detect the process. This is not a coincidence. Not in the cases where the person using the silence method is doing it consciously, and worth understanding even in the cases where they are not, because there are people who operate this way not out of deliberate strategy, but out of their own deep fear of intimacy. their own terror of vulnerability, their own defensive systems built over years of their own injury. That does not make what happens to you less real, but it matters for how you think about leaving and recovering. And we'll get there. There is a moment, and I believe everyone who has lived through this has one, that I want to describe as precisely as possible. It is not a dramatic moment. It does not arrive with a revelation or a sudden scene. It arrives the way the weather changes in autumn, not in one event, but in the accumulated weight of 10,000 small ones. Until one morning you step outside and realize you are cold, in a way that has nothing to do with today's temperature. The moment is this. You are in the middle of an ordinary thing, a meal, a drive, a conversation about something completely unrelated, and you reach for yourself, for your sense of what you think, what you feel, what you believe to be true, and you find that you are not sure where you put it. Not uncertain the way everyone is sometimes uncertain, but functionally unable to locate the ground floor of your own experience. You feel something, and you cannot tell whether you are feeling it or performing it. You have an opinion, and you cannot tell whether it is yours or a version of it that has been pre-corrected for their approval. You look at your own life from inside it, and you do not recognize it as the life you would have chosen. And you cannot find the exact moment you chose otherwise. That is the moment that cannot be taken back. Not because you cannot recover from it, you can, and we'll discuss that, but because once you have had it, you cannot unhave it. You cannot return to the time before the recognition, and some part of you would not want to. The recognition is painful, but the recognition is also the only door. I said at the beginning of this video that Margaret, the woman at the dinner table, the woman who had not genuinely laughed in 11 months, could not point to a single moment she had been hurt. Let me tell you what happened when she could. Not a fictional Margaret. The composite of 20 clinical narratives, drawn from published case studies and first-person accounts in the therapeutic literature. The woman who sits down across from a therapist on a Tuesday afternoon and says, for the first time, out loud, not hedged, not pre-corrected, I think something was done to me. And the therapist, who has heard this sentence many times, says, tell me what you mean. And she tells them, slowly at first, then faster. And as she tells it, she watches the therapist's face for the small correction. For the moment, they will gently reposition her perception as slightly off, and the correction does not come. The therapist only says, I believe you. And she discovers, to her own surprise, that she does not know what to do with being believed. That she has been in the habit of disbelieving herself for so long that being believed by someone else feels like a foreign language. She understands each word individually. She cannot make them cohere into a sentence that means something. That is stage 7's inheritance. And that is where we turn to what comes next. I want to be practical now, because this video has been heavy, and you deserve something to take with you that is actionable. The question I am most often asked, in every format, every platform, every conversation about this topic, is, how do I recognize it while it's happening? Not in retrospect, not from the vantage point of stage 7 looking back, but in the middle of stage 2 or 3, when there is still time to make a different choice. Here are the 4 signals that do not lie. I say they do not lie because they are not cognitive. They are not assessments you make about the other person's behavior, which can always be explained away or reframed. They are signals from your own body and behavior, which are harder to argue with because they are yours. Not in the way everyone rehearses difficult conversations. I mean a specific kind of rehearsal. You are running your words through a filter whose purpose is to anticipate where they will be found insufficient. You are pre-correcting before the correction arrives. If you have noticed yourself doing this, not with difficult subjects but with ordinary ones, not occasionally but consistently, that is a signal. Not the ordinary relief of introversion, or the relief of solitude after a long social day. A specific, slightly guilty relief. The room is easier to breathe in. Your thoughts are more legibly yours. You do things without performing them, and then you feel ashamed of the relief, because what does it mean that the person you've chosen to be close to is someone whose absence is comfortable in a way their presence is not? It means something. It means the signal. When someone asks you how things are, you do not say good or hard or complicated. You say something like, it's mostly good. There are some things. I know I'm probably reading some of it wrong, but... And then you trail off, because you cannot land the plane. You cannot arrive at a clean sentence about your own relationship, because the ability to have clean sentences about your own experience has been quietly removed. Not because those people are untrustworthy, because you have at some point heard, through their calm and reasonable voice, that those people are not entirely safe, or not entirely on your side, or not entirely seeing you clearly. And the circle has drawn in, and you have not told your friend about the last hard thing, or your sister, or the colleague who once knew everything. And you have not told them not because things are fine, but because telling them requires you to say something out loud that you are not yet ready for the consequences of. If you have all four of these signals, you are not at stage 7 yet. You are at a door, the question is what you do with it. I want to be honest with you here, because I think a lot of content about this topic, a lot of the videos, the articles, the listicles, arrive at this point and offer you something clean and tidy. 5 steps to reclaim yourself. 3 things to do today. And I understand the appeal of that. The mind that has been through the 7 stages is very, very hungry for a clear instruction. But I would be doing you a disservice if I gave you that, because the hunger for a clear instruction is itself one of the lasting effects of the process. The habit of looking for the correct answer outside yourself, the need for an external authority to tell you what is real, that is exactly what was built in you. And a video that feeds that need, even with good information, is not helping you find the door. So instead, I'll tell you what recovery actually looks like. Not what it looks like in a montage, what it looks like on a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. This sounds simple. It is one of the hardest things a person who has been through this process will ever do. Because the reflex, the deeply grooved, neurologically reinforced reflex, is to reach for the external check. To ask, is this feeling correct? Is this reading accurate? What would they say about this? Recovery is the practice of catching that reflex before it completes, and returning to the question, what do I actually feel? Not what should I feel? Not what is the defensible version of what I feel. What do I feel? You will get it wrong sometimes. You will overcorrect. You will feel things that are not accurate, because the recalibration process is not clean. You will be too angry for a while, and then not angry enough, and then angry again. You will trust people you shouldn't, and distrust people you should. This is not failure. This is the brain rebuilding its own reference points, in real time, without a reliable template. One of the most significant losses of the 7-stage process is the loss of people who know your story from your perspective. Recovery involves, slowly, selectively, at a pace that is yours, allowing people back into the position of witness. Telling someone the thing you haven't told them, not because you have processed it fully, before you have processed it fully. Letting their receiving of it be part of the processing. This is terrifying in the early stages, because the reflex says, if I say this out loud, there will be a correction. There will be a moment where my reading of it will be gently repositioned. Be prepared for the fact that the correction does not come, and be prepared for the fact that its not coming is disorienting in its own way. Be patient with the disorientation. It is your reference points coming back online. There will be a moment, not at the beginning, not soon, when you will be asked how something is, and you will have a clean sentence, not a hedged one, not a pre-corrected one, just, I'm fine, or I'm not fine, or I don't know, said with the simple authority of someone who trusts that the sentence is theirs. That moment, the first clean sentence, is not the end of anything, but it is the beginning of the end of stage 7. Hold on to it. This is the thing I most want you to leave with. The self that was before stage 1. The person who landed on feelings without checking them first, who described their experience with confidence, who moved through relationships without the constant low-level labor of pre-correction. That person is not gone. That person was not dismantled. They were buried under a process that accumulated quietly over time. And what was accumulated quietly can, with time and the right conditions, be excavated. Not perfectly, not without residue. You will carry some of this the way you carry any significant experience, as texture in you, as caution you didn't used to have, as a sensitivity to certain tones and silences that others around you don't notice, but also as something else, as the particular kind of knowledge that only comes from having been through a specific dark room and out the other side. The knowledge of what the absence of noise can cost. The knowledge of what to look for in the quiet. The knowledge, finally, that calm is not the same as safe, and that the difference between the two is one of the most important distinctions a human being can learn. I want to come back at the end to the man who never yelled. He is still, probably, sitting at a table somewhere, composed. He is still being described by the people around him as steady. The colleague who doesn't know the full story still points to him as an example of emotional control. The family member still says he never loses his temper. He may not know what he has done. That is a real possibility, and I offer it not to excuse him, but to complete the picture. Some people who operate the 7-stage process are doing it deliberately, consciously, with full knowledge of its mechanics. Others are running a program they were themselves installed with, a deep terror of intimacy, a compulsive need for control, a self that was itself reshaped by an earlier version of exactly what they are now doing. This changes the moral calculus only at the edges. It does not change what was done. It does not change the cost. But it changes one thing, and I think that one thing matters. It means the alternative to the 7-stage process, the alternative to the silence method, is not loudness. It is not volatility or emotional chaos, or the relief of the dramatic exit. The alternative is something far more demanding. It is the willingness to be uncertain out loud, to say, I don't know how I feel about this yet, but here is where I am. To allow the other person to see the unfinished version, the draft version, the version that has not been pre-corrected into something presentable. It is the willingness to be known without managing how the knowing goes. That is not a small thing. For some people, it is the hardest thing. For people who have been through the 7 stages themselves, somewhere earlier, in a room you might not even fully remember, it may feel like the most dangerous thing. It is not dangerous. It is the only thing that works. The woman at the dinner table who had not laughed in 11 months, she left, eventually, not in one dramatic moment. In the way things end when you have finally named them, gradually at first, and then completely. She laughed again. Not immediately, not without effort, not without the work of excavating herself from under a process she is still, some days, learning the full shape of. But she laughed, her own laugh. Unhesitating, undrafted, uncorrected. The pearls, in the story I want to leave you with, the pearls that were left on the dressing table on purpose, in plain sight of the door. They were not a surrender. They were the opposite. They were the one thing she owned that could not be explained away or quietly repositioned. They were proof that she had been there. They were proof that she had known. And they were proof that she had chosen, finally, without asking anyone whether the choice was correct, to go. Find your pearls. Leave them where they can be seen. Then walk out the kitchen gate before the house wakes up.